Okay, welcome back to Dominions 5, and today we are again looking at Pelagia for a Nation's Guide. But this isn't the Pelagia that you know and love. This isn't the Pelagia that we led to victory in the Disciples game. This is not the nation that is in competition for one of the top tier dumpster tier positions in Dominions 5. No, this is Middle Age Pelagia, the stronger, more powerful cousin of its earlier self, a nation which has picked itself up by its bootstraps and found its way towards the heap of, reasonably competitive underwater duelists of the Middle Age. So what are we going to do with this guide? I'm going to open with something that's fun for me, maybe not for everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the lore of Pelagia in the Middle Age first. Then we're going to do a usual run-through of units, commanders, summons, etc. Then we're going to talk strategy. But who is Middle Age Pelagia? So you'd be familiar of the basic story of Pelagia in the early age. This was, in the early age, a nation of Tritons, purely underwater beings, led by what were at the time called the Pearl Kings. If you think of this in terms of the world map, there's a couple of places that you could put them, but you've got to imagine these being the relatively shallow ocean-dwelling creatures of probably the Mediterranean, those sort of areas. And in the early age, Pelagia was dominated by the Tritons as its ruling class, but you still had tribal divisions within the empire. So you had the Turtle Tribe, you had the Shark Tribe. Hey, remember the Turtle Tribe, those heroes? Shark Tribe, Amber Clan, various divisions within Pelagian society. And then as a distinctly sort of second tier, you had the Merfolk. So the Merfolk are the ones who are capable of forming human legs and walking on land, but they're distinctly secondary in terms of the importance in early age Pelagian society, and that's reflected in the fact that you have relatively few good merfolk units to choose from. Well, advanced in the Middle Age and the underwater sort of setting of Dominions has experienced quite a lot of a shake-up, and the big shake-up, of course, is R'lyeh. In early age, R'lyeh is the deep sea city of the Aboleths, but in the Middle Era, or rather before the Middle Era kicks off, the Falling Star, the one that carries the Ichthyod's, lands in the deep oceans of the Dominions universe. I imagine somewhere in the Atlantic, probably. Smashes pretty much dead set onto the city of R'lyeh, kills most, but we know not all, of the Aboleths, and is made into a new sort of stronghold for an Ichthyod-based R'lyeh. This disaster really shakes things up. Oceania, which was already suffering from the Atlantean invasions, is put under, is relieved a little bit, but Atlantis, who were starting to gain the upper hand in the deep oceans, really suffers. The basalt city is destroyed, and the Atlantean people are, well, we know from this era, drawn into the caves of Xibalba, or encouraged to bring humans into their ranks to make up for the difficulties they're now facing, the loss of their power. That doesn't really affect Pelagia. In fact, if anything, the disappearance of Theridos probably aids them, and the weakening of the Atlantians gives them a chance. As shallow-dwelling creatures, the Pelagian Empire has actually prospered pretty well. They've developed good relationships with, firstly, Beratos, and then, in this era, Phaecia. They had been involved with the old empire of the Telkines, when that was less of a world-destroying, cursed mess. And we have to assume that they've got relationships with people like Arcocephali, and then before the curse, people like Urmor as well, given the sort of geographical area that they occupy. This has led to certain evolutions in the way the society is structured. The Tritons are still technically in charge, but they've lost a lot of their spiritual authority. The Triton King, for example, is still sacred, but he is no longer a level 3 priest, which, you've got to admit, is a massive demotion. The Tritons still rule sort of the underwater section of the empire, but it's very inward-looking, ruled by the Tritons. However, there are increasing numbers of coastal enclaves, trade facilities, and areas which are ruled by the Merfolk component of the empire, because Tritons can't go on land. And you'll see as we go through the stories in the unit list that there's a difficulty, the Tritons are having a bit of difficulty maintaining full control over all of the Merfolk elements. but at the same time, the Merfolk have developed into a competent, capable military, at least by Pelagian standards. What does this mean? It means that unlike early age Pelagia, you have a good lineup of recruitable Merfolk units and mages. That's critical because they can go on land. Middle age Pelagia, because it has evolved to be more coastal focused, they call land the closed realm, by the way. So whenever you see closed realm, they're referencing on land. You have the ability to develop your closed realm territories and actually be a relevant player in Dominions games. How does that reflect? Well, Pelagia is two things at once. First and foremost, it is one of the best underwater murder machines in the game, even in an era with powerful underwater picks. This is the era with the strongest version of R'lyeh, for example, with middle-aged R'lyeh. Even with its company of Atlantis, R'lyeh, East, Oceania, a very crowded era in the ocean, middle-aged Pelagia is one of the best in an underwater drawn-out fight. And that's because of the power the Tritons bring to the field. But at the same time, it's a reasonably capable land nation by Pelagian standards. Good enough, at least, that you can field an army that isn't based on dudes with turtle shells and coral spears, that is supported by actual mages who you don't have to make magic items for to get on land, and a very competent research core that means you're probably going to be able to keep up with people in the research game and convert into the end game for all Pelagians, which is a safe underwater territory and some coastal enclaves fueling some sort of big astral bullshit based on your ability to pearl farm. Let's go over the units, the unique summons, and get a picture of the nation we're dealing with. Okay, so for the units, some of this is going to be familiar, some of this is not. Overall, it's not worth noting, this is a large roster. By the standards of a lot of nations, this is a medium to large roster, particularly the commander lineup. Pelagian Militia, generic militia unit. This is a Triton militiaman, so you get quite a few hit points, and you hit moderately hard for a militia, but you're still 1 protection, 9 attack, 8 defense. Wouldn't buy it. Merman. This is your militia unit who can go on land. He is more expensive and inferior in every way except for the fact he's amphibious and he has a net. I probably wouldn't buy it. Minor siege chaff options, but I think most people who play Dominions have figured out that summon chaff, there are good summon chaff options for siege chaff. The recruitable militia are there, but often you prefer summon units instead. Then we get into actual Pelagian soldiers. Now, when you see Pelagian anything, it means Triton. The other clue is the tails. Something has 2 tails, it's a Triton. It's aquatic. 1 tail, Merfolk. Pelagian soldiers. This is an underwater hoplite, essentially. For 10 gold, 21 resources, you get a 15 hit point. That's not nothing. 14 prot, 12 magic resistant, 11 morale, 16 combat speed, Tritons are fast underwater, 11 attack, 12 defense guy, who does 17 pierce. This is actually a good line infantryman. If you're looking for a line infantryman underwater, the Pelagian soldier, you can seriously do worse. And the 17 bronze trident is useful considering you're going to come up against things like meteorite guards and other heavily armoured underwater units. Now, he's still not a meteorite guard. We'll compare those later, but he at least has the ability to sometimes do damage to them. The Coral Clan Hoplite is a true underwater hoplite in the sense that it actually has Formation Fighter. Which is interesting for an underwater unit. I'm not aware of many examples of this. This is 13 gold, 16 hit points, 12 attack, 12 defense. You go up to 18 protection. You're now at an encumbrance 9 though. You're at morale 12. A pretty heavy elite unit. The key here being you go from having that 17 pierce trident to a length 4 and packed 4 to a square. 14 pierce damage coral long spear, which applies a weak poison effect. That's not bad either. These are good units. Let's move along. Amber Clan Guard. Amber Clan Guard does a little bit more damage, has a little bit more protection again at the cost of being a little more expensive. This is still like a slight upgrade over your Pelagian Soldier. The main difference being you're spending a lot more resources in exchange for getting a lot more protection. Up to 17 from 14. So maybe situations where you want that, maybe not. But you're seeing a theme that resources are in very high demand. Pelagia, unlike its earlier incarnation, is a production nation. It benefits from production if you can fit it into the schedule. Then you have 2 capital-only sacreds. 2. So there is competition in your capital for recruitment, and they could not fill more different functions. Let's deal with a semi-nation defining one first. The Knight of the Deep. 70 gold and 25 resources and 48 recruitment points. So heavier on the recruitment point side and lower on resources relative to gold compared to your other units. Only 16 hit points, but you get 17 protection, 14 magic resistance. Important in an era where we're sharing the water with R'lyeh, who is a mine-blasting nation. Morale 14, attack 12, defense 17, strength 13. Like, all these stats are great. Combat speed 30, these things can move. They've got decent map move. They don't have particularly high encumbrance because they're mounted. And the unit itself, as well as being sacred and having recuperation, because the underwater mount, the Hippocampi, they're basically underwater unicorns. They have, and therefore they have, recuperation. You get the lance, so a full lance, which you get 6 plus the full heavy charge bonus on your first attack, which is good. And then after that, you can go over to your bronze spear, which is also length 3 and it's repeatable. 16 damage at attack value 12. Not bad, and that's before Bless. Finally, the Hippocampus itself will attack with a 14 magic piercing damage alicorn. Compare this to hoof attacks. 1, you don't normally get hoof attacks underwater, and 2, compare it to an ordinary hoof attack. It is much, much better. 14 magic pierce, not bad. Doesn't benefit from strength bonuses that you might otherwise want to put on these guys if you want to pierce armor of things like, say, Meteorite Guardsmen again. But being reasonably high damage pierce to begin with is useful. Alicorn definitely helps to harass people down, increases your attack density. This is a good profile, and that first lance charge is going to do enough damage to seriously make people think. I'm just checking which, if any of these, none of those have poison on them. So this is it's not quite an elf, but it has elf-like features as an underwater cavalry unit. It is high defense. Unlike elves, it has high protection. It has multiple attacks, and it is sacred. And therefore, it will chew through independence. Absolutely chew through most of the independence you'll find underwater. If you encounter low number, high danger underwater enemies, like krakens and sea trolls, that's 2 province types that you might encounter, that lance charge is going to help put them down, as are the multiple attacks. If you encounter a whole bunch of chaffy shit, it's going to be hard for these guys to be hit a lot of the time because they don't get harassed as badly because they're on horses, and because they have naturally high defense skill, and they have lots of prot to begin with. They even do relatively well against Shark Tribe because the protection keeps them going while they chew through them really, really quickly with this weapon set. So, Knight of the Deep gives you a distinct advantage over a lot of your underwater enemies. They are superior to what Oceania will be fielding underwater on a purchase-for-purchase basis. They are superior to what most of your enemies will be fielding underwater. So until water elementals become dominant, and even after they do, these are fast, competent, capable underwater sacred cavalry. You can do something with that. This compares very well to what's available to you in the early era where you had a sacred underwater-only infantryman. The Knight of the Deep is just better. You also get the Champion of the Closed Realm. This is an underwater, heavy, sacred infantryman. It's just got a short sword, but it's a 16 damage, slash or pierce, short sword, 23 gold, so twice the cost of an ordinary infantryman. You get 13 hit points, bit of an upgrade. 19 prot. 19 prot. So we're not quite at Ormish Blackplate levels, but that is a lot of protection. Unlike Ormish units, you've got 12 magic resistance rather than less than 10. You have 13 morale. You do cost 30 resources, and you have 8 encumbrance. But you've also got good skills. Attack 12, defense 13. Those are good skills. The critical element about the Champion of the Closed Realm is this is not a Triton. It's a Merman. These are the Champions of the Closed Realms who have been given status and importance in Pelagia, and as a result, they're capital only, but they're still sacred, unlike the Apostates of the Closed Realms who we'll talk about later. This unit gives you the opportunity to expand ashore. You've got 2 real ways you can do it, right? You can do it using Wave Warriors, who is an amphibian. His weakness, of course, is he's got lower prot, he has no shield, but he's still got a very high damage attack and a reasonable amount of prot. So you can go ashore with either Wave Warriors, or you can go ashore with Champions of the Closed Realm. And this means that if you do end up either in a lake by yourself, or you've killed your underwater opponent, you still have a use for your capital in terms of recruitment. You can switch from the Knights of the Deep that you have blessed to Champions of the Closed Realm. You might even want to open with some of these in some of your early turns to help get yourself an underwater enclave. This is really helpful. You'll notice that there's only really 2 units that go on land here, the Champion of the Closed Realm and the Wave Warrior, but that's okay because these are both so much better than Turtle Warriors in terms of your ability to get on land. This is more prot, this is higher damage, this is better skills. They're just better. And morale is obviously very good, and of course, Champions of the Closed Realm are sacred. People have proven within that you can expand with sacred short sword infantry, like it's doable. This is a pretty decent sacred short sword infantryman, so you may not have a huge number of them. You don't need a huge number in order to claim some indie provinces on land, bulk out some armies, and since they're sacred, also give you some options on things like foul vapors that we'll talk about when we get to strategy. Once you get on land, there are actually coastal recruits this time. How incredible is this? So, Merman Hoplites, recruitable on land, so you won't be able to recruit your Champions of the Closed Realm, but you can recruit Apostates of the Closed Realm. Altogether, these are a bit of a disappointment by comparison. You've lost a little bit of prot, you've lost sacred status, they get cheaper because you're no longer paying for sacred status, they pick up a javelin. I don't like them because they don't wear hats. I have very little patience for units that refuse to wear hats, especially moderately expensive units. The Champion, Apostate of the Closed Realm, these are the guys who were basically told to abolish their presence. They're a religious order of warriors. They're told to close their presence on land so the Tritons can bring them under closer control. That kind of officially happens, sort of, but a lot of them stay and continue fighting and their cause, and even though they're considered heretics by the Tritons, technically they're too useful to abandon, so a lot of the commanders on shore kind of keep using them anyway. So it's a non-sacred, non-hat-wearing merman who's got a pretty good, a decent plate cuirass, but he'd be better if he wore a hat. The javelin is not worth compensating for the absence of a hat. The merman hoplite, by contrast, actually does wear a hat. This is a protection 18, very high encumbrance, lower skill, but cheaper, more serviceable formation fighting hoplite. Which of these will you choose? Neither of these is amazing. Neither of these is amazing for their cost. The Apostate of the Closed Realm gives you decent stats for his cost relative to a lot of human infantrymen, but the head thing is a vulnerability. The Javelin, however, is useful. Hoplites can be useful, Formation Fighter is useful, but they don't do a huge amount of damage. Either way, these are vaguely serviceable units. You're probably going to do better in most cases if you can bring Wave Warriors up from underwater, or of course, if you have Champions of the Closed Realm. Summary. You have a Sacred that lets you conquer the underwater area, supported by some very capable underwater line infantry. You have a Sacred that lets you get on land, as well as a recruitable Amphibian who hits really hard despite not being Sacred. 19 Pierce is solid. You then have some semi-functional recruitable coastal units. That's not amazing, but it's much better than what early age Pelagia has, and it means you have genuine options in influencing the game. That's the unit lineup. Let's talk mages. Yeah, Scout. Lots of people like Scouts. You get an Amphibious Scout. Hooray. Go you. Wave Lord. 60 leadership, generic commander. 40, and he is an Amphibian. You've got a not particularly motivational commander who can lead dudes on land. Congratulations. The one who can lead guys only underwater is the Pelagian Captain. Pelagian Captain has better individual skills, like as a combatant, but the same amount of leadership. For that reason, I don't think I'd limit myself by recruiting them. Most of the time, I'm going to get the Wave Lords because they can go on land later. One thing to note with all these guys is they all have Pearl Tridents. Pearl Tridents do magic damage. Niche, but I thought I'd point it out. Amber Clan Nobles. At this point, you're going up to 80 leadership. Little upgrade like Amber Clan always is, but you are now stuck underwater again. These stats are good, but you don't hire non-magic commanders for their stats. You might hire this guy for his +1 morale, maybe, but Then it's mage lineup time, and then a few commanders. I'm going to wind out the commanders, and then we want to do the mages in a big run. The Triton Prince is expensive. This is a 120 leadership commander for 2 recruitment points, which you'll remember means +2 morale for his relevant squads. Combined with the naturally high morale of Pelagian units, you're not going to have many routes as a Pelagian army if you've got a prince leading your forces. Morale values of 16, very easily obtained. Add a few experience stars, even more so. That said, it's 200 gold for what is essentially just a Sacred Commander. Bare minimum. Bare minimum niche cases. Despite being Sacred, you're not going to thug them. They've got no magic paths. Like, you could do it if you wanted to be hilarious, but, like, why? Also, they're not priests, so they don't do well leading expansion parties. Other commander, Conqueror of the Closed Realm. This is your leader version of that, of the Conqueror of the Closed Realm unit. Priest 1. Priest 1 and Sacred, 80 leadership, which is serviceable, and a magic path random, air, earth, astral. All of which make him more likely to survive and not get sniped. So those are all paths that are very good for making sure a commander doesn't get sniped by earth skinning or body ethereal or whatever. Like, these paths help you misform. These paths help you survive, as does the bless incidentally, and you can bless the expansion parties. These are good, they're good expansion party leaders. And then recruitable on land, the Merman Commander, who is a generic 60 leadership recruitable on land commander. Done. Let's talk priests and mages. Merman Priest, generic, level 1 priest, 45 gold. This is cheap, this is cheaper than indie level 1 priests. So if you have built forts and temples, you might want to recruit them. Often, if you can avoid it by using places that only have temples and don't have your forts, you'll do that instead because your mages are so good that every command point matters. Pelagia, I'm going to tell you right now, is a nation where command points are valuable because your mages are super efficient in terms of gold, so you want lots and lots of command points in order to get the most out of them. Amber Clan Priest is the worst priest. The Amber Clan Priest costs more gold and can only go underwater in exchange for having slightly higher individual stats. Have you ever thought, man, I really wish my level 1 preacher had 5 more hit points? No? Okay, moving on. Amber Clan Priests suck. Pearl Clan Priests. This is your level 2 priest. For 15 more gold than your Amber Clan Priest, who was useless, you instead now get a priest level 2, who can still only go underwater. You'll remember these guys from the early era. They can be useful if you're trying to preach Dominion underwater. Priest level 2s can preach provinces much higher than level 1s can, so they have a purpose. Most of the time, you're probably going to be recruiting level 1s because they're flexible, they can go on land, but a couple of level 2 priests, like, a recruitable level 2 priest is fine. I'm happy with that. Their leadership is 40, by the way, so they can actually lead small parties and bless them reliably. Very small parties can be led by merman priests. The Pelagian Mystic. This guy is new. So this is, straight off the bat, this is a Merfolk unit. So totally capable of going on land. Air, water, earth, random. That random is air, water, earth, astral. Now, all of those are a little bit useful. The earth gives you access to E2, which means earth power. A2 means you've got some flexibility, particularly if you have something that's capable of throwing up storm. Although even A2 by itself means that in desperation, full-sized air elementals might be something that catch people off guard. Water 2 means that underwater you are summon water power and then full-size water elementals. It's also a 15 research mage, so this is a fast researching mage. There's some problems with the Pelagian Mystic though. It's a welcome new addition, make no mistake. And having your recruit anywhere underwater, sometimes astral paths, also useful. Being able to pipe all these paths into astral communions, useful. Two issues. It's still only an underwater recruit. You can't get these guys on land the way you could get the explorers. And secondly, it's 4 recruitment points. So you're only getting 1 every 2 turns. This is a slow to recruit mage, which is not what you'd expect looking at this profile. First and foremost, the lore reason is their study of Telkeen secrets is time-consuming and the initiation of new mystics is uncommon at best, because they're bringing in a new tradition of magic. This is the Telkeenis magical tradition that's being incorporated into Pelagia. So the mystic is a little bit of a drag in that sense because they're slow to recruit. Pelagian mermage, you remember by the way, nature, earth, water, air, plus a little bit of water. Really cheap, cheerful researcher. Your explorers used to be your better option there for a researcher, but it's a functional research mage as well. If you recruit 2 of these guys, by the way, you end up with 18 research for 190 gold versus 15 research for 130 gold. The Pelagian Mystic is more efficient. If you have magic scales, then that tips the mermage up the scales a little bit, but the Pelagian Mystic is more generally viable if you ever have to go into combat. The Pearl Mage is still here. It's still useful as an underwater combatant. It's still useful if you have to take it on land, but you can get access to most of these paths other ways now. You still get your air, water, astral, nature. You've still got 2 water straight off the bat. You're still always astral, and you're a pearl cultivator, which gives you access to that unique mechanic. It's only 2 recruitment points, so it's faster to accumulate research points this way than recruiting either of the 2 previous mages, but here you're limiting yourself to operating only underwater. They are, however, rapidly recruitable, effective water elemental summoners. Every water 2 can water power to water 3 and make a full-sized water elemental. And having recruit anywhere water elemental casters is one of the keys to being a powerful underwater nation. The Amber Clan Mage, likewise, is underwater only. Also a water elemental summoner, straight out of the box. A little more expensive, not much better at research. The pathing here is a little bit different. Critically, fire, water combined means you're looking at acid as a cross path here. Difficult to get it on land, but worth remembering and thinking as you go later in the game that fire-water is an odd cross path, and it can be valuable. The Triton King is still around. As I said, this has gone from being a Priest 3 unit to a non-priestly, merely sacred unit. It's still bloody expensive. 390 gold, but you get guaranteed water 4, and you get a very, very small chance at water 5. Your randoms give you a reasonable chance at air, nature, and astral. The astral in some senses can be a little bit of a vulnerability, because you can be magic jeweled, but also means that you can wire some really, really high water castings out of a communion. You can get water very high off a communion in this nation. Pearl Cultivator 4, you won't want to use them for, they're not very efficient, and they Dominion summon Hippocampi. Finally, and very importantly, this is the Daldukos. Now, this unit is the successor to the Pelagian Explorer, who I knew and loved and appreciated. The Daldukoi follow on from that Telkine tradition, and in many ways they're better than the old Explorer. The base path is now fire, the cross path is air, water, earth, and astral. Astral is always useful because this is your new communion slave. You no longer have the capital only fish mage, the Ichthyod Shaman, who I miss greatly. The Ichthyod Shaman would be very welcome in Middle Age Pelagia. That makes them your communion slaves. At 65 gold for 11 research points, they are very efficient researchers. Very efficient researchers. They are your access to a little bit of light forging, but mostly this is a research mage and occasionally a communion mage. The reason that they're notable is because this is your coastal recruit. This is your on-land mage. EA Pelagia only had one, the Explorer. You've only got one, the Daldukos. The problem with the Daldukos is recruitment points. It's 4. It's a slow to recruit mage. It's super cheap. So running a fort that is an upgraded fort for Pelagia that is recruiting mages every turn on repeat only costs 32.5 gold. It's very cheap to run forts. And if you could summon a bunch of these, you would, because they're very efficient researchers. And so much about what Pelagia can do comes down to how quickly you can research. You are a nation of nerds. You should be played as such. But you are limited by that 4 recruitment points number. This means that enclaves can be very valuable to Pelagia. Even 1 or 2 coastal provinces without much surrounding land can still have a temple built in it and a lab. They do require a temple even though they aren't sacred. That's another important point. And pump these guys out till the cows come home. Would you have rather kept the Pelagian Explorer overall? Yes. I think this is a rare area of a downgrade between EA and MA. But you still have a recruitable coastal mage, you have a better underwater combat lineup, you have an on-land and land recruitable lineup, and you've got more of your mages capable of operating on land. In particular, being able to recruit Pelagian Mystics underwater who are capable of on-land warfare greatly increases your options. So overall summary, great underwater combat potential, some dedicated water elemental summoners, lots of elemental magic scattered around, no death, no blood, a little bit of astral, a little bit of nature, and then you can broaden out a little bit more because you gain 2 conjuration spells from Theridos as the partial heritor to the Therodian tradition, because you had a lot of contacts with that empire. If we go research conjuration, at conjuration 5, you get the ability to, if you can get to nature 3, water 1, which is not hard, really, hard to do with pure recruitables, unless you're very lucky. You can do it with N2 and Thistle Mace, if you're very lucky with these guys. More realistically, you'll be going for the Pearl Mage, getting an N1, and then maybe boosting Empowering, or buying a booster, buying 2 boosters even. It's a little bit of a leap unless you have nature on your god, and there are god options that have nature in them. You're going to want Thistle Maces anyway, by the way, because you want to be able to foul vapors. Hecaterides give you the ladies that you know and love from Theridos. Okay, and now to re-record because the sound didn't work the first time. What I had originally recorded here was a section on how you put all those components together and what the game plan for Pelagia is. I think where I want to go with these nation guides is less a focus on individual god builds. I can provide those if they'd be useful, but more a focus on what is the game plan for a nation? How can you play it? How should you want to play it? And with MA Pelagia, I think here's the basic game plan. If you are in a game with another water nation, you have a massive early advantage against any neighbor that you might come up against, with the possible exception of MA R'lyeh. Atlantis can fight it out with you, but the things that you can bring to the field are probably better than what they can bring to the field. Your knights will beat Mother Guard if you have built your Mother Guard for defense, because you will hit hard enough to kill these guys, and they will struggle to consistently hurt yours in return. Although you might get some poison barb damage from the Alicorn, but the reality is Knights of the Deep will expand really well and they'll kill those guys, especially if you get this defense figure up higher. Against the Easians, going up against Morvarks only have one attack underwater and they're more expensive. Person for person, you can beat Morvarks, and your line troops are much, much better than Ys's other options in terms of line troops. They can bring Knights of Ys to the battle, maybe. Against Oceania, you just have a huge initial advantage against people who might want to play in the water. So Agartha, Xibalba, it's not even fair in terms of the troops that come underwater. So the only people who can really fight you, Atlantis and R'lyeh, and against both of them, if you build appropriately, you've got the tools necessary to knock them out. So you have two early game strategies, and the one I would usually pick if you're in the water or likely to be in the water with anyone other than those two nations is go and destroy them. Take your lake. Rush them down, with your initial research goal being Conjuration 5, expand, rush, kill, maim, burn, absorb that other nation, and that will be your heartland. If you might be in the water with R'lyeh or Atlantis, then this is where it starts being in your interest to take more of a bless so that your sacreds can do more of the heavy lifting early on versus taking more of an economic bless. The amount that you invest in your bless and your early combat capability, so your pretender's combat capability if you go awake, or more likely the amount of bless you take on something like an imprisoned, is dictated by what you think you're probably going to need to fight your opponent in the water. I'm assuming here you know what nations are going to be in the game, and you know either the map or that water nations tend to spawn together rather than in individual lakes most of the time. The good thing is that if your opponent is R'lyeh, while they are quite strong, their combat capability at the start of the game is predictable because they don't have, there's not much you can do to buff them up with sacred units because they have no sacred line units. You're going to be facing Mind Blasters and chaff and shit, or you're going to be facing Meteorite Guard, whether they go the Production R'lyeh or they go Sloth R'lyeh. Against Atlantis, there's a little more of a question because you don't know what the Mother Guard are going to rock out at. And while I said your guys will probably beat these most of the time, Mother Guard are still quite solid. They can take a good bless. They've got a lot of hit points. They're cheaper than your guys. That what lets them down is the stats are lower. They're going to get harassed down by your guys with the multiple attacks, and you hit hard enough with your lance charges to do damage and kill them. And if you add a little bit of strength in particular, you'll get through. As for the other Atlantean line troops, you can make it work with your guys. Just be aware that Atlanteans in general hit pretty bloody hard. So yeah, a little bit of a question mark over them. But as for the others, Ys and whatnot, expect a bless, but you can still manhandle them underwater. So that's that. The early game plan in a game with a water nation is absorb the other water nation, and that becomes your base. I wouldn't normally play hug box with the other water nation because that's doing a disservice to all of the advantages that you have as an underwater combat nation. You have the Tritons, you have the Sacreds, and if you get to Conjuration 3 and then Conjuration 5, which you can do because you've got decent research mages. You have oodles and oodles and oodles of easy to mass, lesser and full-sized water elemental summoners. So you kit it out for that early game battle. I'm probably going to take it. I'm confident in taking that underwater fight. If you're less confident, the early game option is to ally and hug box with a sufficiently powerful underwater nation, and then you can plan your on-land expansions together. I would be cautious about doing this with R'lyeh and Atlantis because they're both better on land than you are, and if you work together, they may outgrow you. But if there are sufficiently many land nations in the game and you think you might be able to play the game better than your colleague underwater, then maybe there's room for that. Maybe. If there is no underwater nation, then you are not going Bless. You are going as scales as you can. The water is yours and you'll be able to get it anyway. You can get any scales build will still include some light bless because it's usually going to be something like an imprisoned with some stats blesses. And with some stat blesses, your closed realm sacreds, so your foot sacreds, can expand on land perfectly fine. And if not, production scales and a few underwater provinces would let you expand on land perfectly fine as well. You're not going to swarm all over the continent, but you can grab a couple of coastal enclaves. And at that point, it becomes all about how much productivity can you get out of your core territory and your coastal enclaves. In terms of transitioning into the middle game, in either scenario, the game here becomes how do you act as a secondary or a tangential actor to anything that's happening on land? So how do you take advantage of the situation to expand while not expanding in such a way that makes sense for someone to come after you and take your land provinces, even if that means that they're going to be raided by you until the end of time. So little enclaves are useful here, alliances with land nations that are at war that could use a little bit of backup and will let you have holdings in exchange, useful in the sense. You have the advantage, you have the underwater advantage in diplomacy, which is that people do not want to go to war with you because they cannot finish you, and most of your holdings can't be taken by them and have no value to them. So the relative cost of any of your land provinces to them is much higher, because they can take those provinces, but they then face raiding forever that they can't really knock out. It takes a lot for a land nation to get to the point in the game where it can come underwater and play with MA Pelagia. It's just a big ask for a nation with this sort of lineup. So that's your transition into the middle game. You've got your underwater base either hug boxed, so you're safe, or you've killed your underwater neighbor and you have an even bigger peaceful zone, which fuels your economy. At this stage, MA Pelagia wants forts. It wants temples. It's an infrastructure nation. Why? Because it has a lot of high CP but efficient mages available to it. It's got a good research core. It has the opportunity to be very good at research. If you look at your recruitables again, you'll notice that thing that you have available to you. No, it's not the Mystic that I want. Oh, that's because I want the coastal. If you look at the Dedukoi are always going to be fire mages, and they're cheap researchers. So what is this telling you? It's telling you that lightless lanterns are in your future. If you can get yourself into a situation where your status as a water nation, coupled with the destruction of your neighbor, means you have a stable economy and the land nations do not want to come after you, then there is every reason for a Pelagia that thinks it is safe to go construction and to start pumping out lightless lanterns and undergo a research boom. It's one of the great luxuries that a water nation with a little bit of on-land combat capability can do. But in order to make it work, you need lots of researchers, and because you've got researchers that cost 4 recruitment points, or at least the ones that you have that can go on land that you're going to want a lot of the time, you could go Pelagian mermages, but they just don't have much utility out. So a lot of the time you're going to be recruiting Dedukoi from all your on-land provinces because it's your only choice. Plus you'll get communions out of them. Those are the ones I wouldn't give lanterns, by the way. I have the Astra ones available for communion duty, and the ones that are less useful, they can get lanterns. The ones with really good randoms, keep them. Don't get them eaten by horrors. So, forts are on the agenda, temples are on the agenda, a high economy build is on the agenda, because once you break into more and more research, you get more and more options, obviously. And Pelagia is one of those nations where it has an early game gimmick in a certain context, which is that it has decent underwater capability in the early game. It can do that early game underwater knife fighting, but after that, it kind of needs to expand its options. And it does that very well through its research capabilities. You've already gone up conjuration with Pelagia to get water elementals. A little bit more conjuration, for example, will get you access to a whole range of diversity options. You're going to have access to Hecaterides, which are better naiads. You can get a little bit of death if you need it, and some specialist forging and discounts by bringing in your little Therodian dwarves, plus all of the options that Conjuration normally gives you for breaking into other fields. And if you've taken a Rainbow imprisoned or an Immobile imprisoned, you're probably going to have access to some paths on that you can use to summon specific summons and break into other fields. A Death Pretender, for example, not tremendously useful to you in terms of what the Bless brings you, but would allow you to break into what you saw me do in the EA Pelagia game. You can break into Death Immortals, for example. Think about the late game potential that a little bit of diversity on your god and your summons can unlock, and you start to bring those out. MA Pelagian armies, when they have to go into battle, are communion-supported line infantry forces. They're not that different from some of the more heavily armored human nations that we associate with the game, humanoid being size 2 nations. You have groups of like wave warriors, which are essentially medium protection, hard-hitting infantrymen with decent stats, or other mainline troops, maybe some champions of the closed realm in the sacred shock troop role, supported by a communion that brings water, air, earth, nature, fire to the mix, which is a pretty good mix. If you if you communion in very high water from your Triton Kings, if you need it, by the way, is there. But you have access to a wide range of elemental magic paths, and in the middle game, elemental paths are much more useful. Well, they're useful at all stages of the game, but in the late game, sorcery paths tend to rule. The late game paths that people tend to think of them and realize, oh, wait a minute, they're all sorcery paths. It's astral, it's death, it's blood. But in the middle game, there's a lot to be gained from the elemental spells. So absolutely break out those, and also break out nature. You've actually got a reasonable amount of nature available to you, particularly once you get into the Hecateride space. If you have nature on your god, consider getting poison resistance, because you can easily be a foul vapors nation. You can do acid tricks. You can do all sorts of cool gimmicks in the middle game. And if you're in an environment where something like foul vapors is a solution that would solve a problem or deter an opponent, then by all means, break it out. It's not great. It's not good underwater, but on land, you have the tools to deploy it. Unlike EA Pelagia, where you needed to bring the poison resistance with spells, you can put some of it on your sacreds and protect them that way. The real, I suppose, goal is not to run over everyone in the middle game, although that is an option. It's always a chance that if you play the diplomacy right, in a game, you can run over everyone and just win. You can snowball. It's possible. But Pelagia is one of those few nations in Dominions where you've got a few gimmicks that are specifically designed for if you want to snowball in peace. Blood nations can do this to an extent, although eventually they burn out. Scaleria does this incredibly, incredibly well. Nazca can do this. Pelagia's uber late game trick is a combination that we started to show off in the EA Pelagia game, because MA Pelagia has the same basic tools. You have pearl farming, which lets you turn your supply of huge amounts of water gems into astral pearls, and if you have access to sufficiently high astral, you can get into things like Wish and Arcane Nexus. The presence of pearl farming means that Wish makes sense, and this, just talking about this, confirms to me that Wish needs to have a video all of itself on its mechanics. But the summary is, if you can turn 25 water gems into 25 astral pearls without paying any sort of alchemy fee, then wishing for gems becomes more efficient. If you can throw Arcane Nexus up on top of that, the whole process becomes stupidly efficient and scalable. And for a nation that's very good at research, that is an environment where it can naturally defend itself, so being underwater is a great advantage in that sense. So you can make particularly good use of things like Vengeful Water, and in case of desperation, Sea of Ice, and just abandon your land provinces and lock the land nations out of the water entirely unless they're bypassing it that way. There's lots of defensive options available to you. Breaking out those late game options, even if they cause everyone to turn on you, can work really, really well. And you might have the gem generation to do it. Water nations tend to have decent gem generation anyway, if for no other reason than because Voice of Tiamat, which is on a research line that you're going to take anyway, lets you turn water gems, which you have lots of, into level 9 site searches for earth, air, and fire. So water nations tend to have a good income of all elemental gems to begin with. Add to that the fact with Pelagia that you can search for nature and that you can search for astral. And if you put a little bit of effort in, you might be able to search for a little bit of death. And if you've got a death pretender, before that astral death pretender, whatever the combination is casting big astral spells or casting big summons, they can search a part of your land for death or get a couple of death summons out that can search it. So you will get good gem yield, particularly out of your water provinces. That's the key to a late game victory. The late game Pelagian army, the late game Pelagian strategy, doesn't use many Pelagians. It's summon based. Its mages are conjured. It brings in... It's using the generic spells fueled by the defensive infrastructure, the research, and the economy that MA Pelagia provides as a pivot. And there is never a phase of the game where it becomes easy for enemies to come underwater and fight you unless they massively overmatch you in research and resources. Because if they bring... The reality is that super combatants have to be very well built in order to survive water elementals in general, and buffed water elementals with some counter thugs are very hard to deal with underwater for someone who's not already built for it. So you've got the option there to turtle your way to victory if you choose to do so. And if you want to know more about how to pull that process off, then I need to make that wish video about how you can scale that and essentially get infinite gems, and then also how you can importantly break the blood economies and the other scaling mechanisms that other nations you're fighting might use. It goes without saying that at every stage of this game, diplomacy is particularly important. In the early game, it's important to make sure that you're fighting one water nation at a time in a war that you can win and that you are not distracted. So if there are two water nations in the water, you don't want to fight both at once. You want to fight one, then you want to fight the other, or you want to hug box with the other. You don't want to be 2-on-1. Once you get to the mid-game, your involvement in land wars has to be carefully chosen. People are going to want naps with you because they don't want to be raided from the water. People don't want you to grow out of control. So negotiating your enclaves where you have 1 or 2 provinces here and some forts and they leave you alone and you give them peace, or negotiating which wars you get involved with, you kind of need to play the traditional role of the UK. This applies to a lot of water nations. You need to be the UK. You need to keep the land divided against itself. You need to make sure that no team gets too far ahead so that you, in the water, with less of the thrones and less of the economy relative to the land, but with more resources than any one land nation, are in a position to keep building up your relative advantage. Because eventually, the purpose of that late game boom I described, which is just one option, you can also build, if you get researched ahead, you can just build high research armies and start running people over, because research in Dominions can be lethal. If you're running around with fog warriors and they've got no counter, you're going to walk over them. I don't care what nation they are. Well, actually I do. There are nations that can counter that very easily, but you get the idea. If you've got the big battlefield buffs and you've got some thugs done and you've got some SCs done and they don't have counters because they don't have the research, you're going to run them over. all those late game tools are meant to do is give you so many additional resources that you can eventually break out on land, because at the end of the day, you will not win unless you can go on land. There will not be enough thrones. In the end, you will need to fight the land nations for it, but you can delay that conflict for as long as it benefits you, and it is in the interest of most land nations to leave you be. You are not a contender. Sorry, you are not the most dangerous contender to win a game. You're not the most powerful nation out there. R'lyeh is a better nation because it is better on land than you, and it's got other options. Its research is probably a little more optimized. There are other reasons. Its line infantry, the meteorite guardsman is incredible. And the Middle Age is full of cancerous, overpowered nations that people are probably going to want to deal with first. If there's a Scaleria in the game, it has to die. Scaleria must be destroyed. Scaleria delunda est. Other people will also want to strangle Nazca in the grave if it's around. People will be fearful of Ashdod. The list of scary Middle Age nation goes on. Nabah is another one that people might want to see taken out of the game before they can pull off their typical bullshit that they unlock later on. The list goes on. All the blood nations need to die. You're low on the list of nations that needs to be killed, so play like it. Murder your neighbors, carve out a water empire, and then macro. Macro while you get involved in cheap, cheerful, politically sensible wars until you've got such a macro advantage that it is possible for you to roll on land, or you can involve yourself in a series of coalition wars. It's a diplomatic playstyle, it's not an overpowered playstyle, but it's how I would suggest making the most use of MA Pelagia's tools. And in closing, in saying that, the relationship between what makes that strategy very similar but also very different to EA Pelagia is that because you have additional land combat capability, it's more important for you to involve yourself in those early wars. It's more important for you to get those enclaves because you have a better ability to take a few land and coastal provinces, but you're only getting half as many mages from them. Because instead of Pelagian explorers, the Dedukoi cost 4 recruitment points instead of 2. It's one of the key downgrades of the nation. Also, the troops you get on land are not useless. So if you need troops, getting a bunch of 18 prot troops from on land is an option available to you. Hopefully that gives you a reasonable sense of how I would play MA Pelagia. It's, as I said, it's got elements in common with its EA brethren, but its additional land combat and also its additional sea combat capability give it a greater incentive to expand more and to be more active in those wars. But ultimately, it should still be aware that at the end of the day, it still has that option to be a turtley late game macro nation, as long as you bring a god which is configured to enable you to unlock that potential. The nation is just a basis to create an economy of gems and research and whatnot that will support the nifty, if generic, tools that you can bring to bear. I love MA Pelagia. I haven't played that in a full MA game, but every moment, every turn where I played EA Pelagia, I wished I had some of the tools that were available to me if I'd played this nation. I wish you the best of luck if you play it. I'm more than happy to answer questions. I'll do a sequel if I need to. Otherwise, I'm also taking suggestions for which nation you'd like me to cover next. My temptation, however, is to cover Erythia so that I can do the full fluff evolution of EA Pelagia to MA Pelagia to Erythia, even though I know Erythia has been done before by GC, and then to pick another nation where I can walk it through its ages to see how the lore and the construction of the nation's units and mages and strategy evolves over time. Maybe completing Agartha, doing MA, which has been done before, but then also looking at the less popular the less popular LA Agartha as well. Just an idea. I'll take suggestions and go from there. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always. I'll see you again soon.